Hi everyone, it's Lisa here from the WOW Network. Remember, we're here to support, guide and connect with LGBTQ women in the workplace. Today I am joined by one of our patrons, Jacqui, and Jacqui's going to, for LGBT History Month, talk to me a little bit about her history and how history has shaped her life. So thank you so much for joining me, Jacqui. A real pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Excellent. So can you, for those of us who don't know as much about you, can you give us a little bit of background and why LGBT History Month is so important to you?
So thank you, Lisa. I am 53 years old for my sins. So I came out as being transgender as a young 15-year-old kid back in 1983, Scotland, if my Dorset tones don't already give it away. At a time where being different meant you were more likely to be ostracised by your friends, families, and the wider society as a whole. Coming out at that sort of tender young age, I ended up running away from home as that young 15-year-old kid, where I thought the streets would be paved with gold, i.e. London. Proved not to be the case, because I think things were just as bad down there as they were everywhere else in the United Kingdom at a time when, as we know, there was no real legislation to provide any support to anybody within the LGBTQIA plus identities and sexual orientations, etc., etc. So since then, I've been an activist in the trans space specifically, trying to ensure that we get the rights for trans people from that time right up to the present day, where I took not just being an activist, but also the role when I worked in central civil service, particularly working with from about 2010 through to about 2019, when I was in various different roles, from looking at the legislation, looking at the process, looking at the guidance that we provided to ensure that the UK civil service became the most inclusive employer in the United Kingdom. But again, my mainstay was very much from a trans perspective, taking it beyond just what we call the binary trans to including other expressions and identities under the wider trans umbrella.
And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people still see trans as being very binary. You know, it's either a trans man or a trans woman, but there's so much more than that. And I think it's amazing the work that you did there, because it really did help to make things, you know, a lot more equal and inclusive, and kind of future-proofing it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So important, because as you see, it was bad enough people didn't really understand what it was to be a binary trans person, but trying to ensure that we gave that overview to include the other, as you say, expressions, identities, and also those individuals who are born with intersex conditions as well, to recognise that as well.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, there's not that much information about intersex, and it's certainly something that I'm doing a bit more learning on as well, because I want to be as inclusive as possible, but we all have to learn. We can't just pretend that we can be inclusive without learning.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So with all the different legislations, what's the one that maybe stands out to you the most that you've worked on?
I suppose the main aspect, I mean, yes, we had the GRA. So I think looking at the GRA reforms as it's gone through, we know there's still more work to be done on GRA. Let's not get us wrong. Let's correct ourselves in terms of acronyms, because it's Gender Recognition Act. But also looking at the Equality Act, especially particularly about the gender reassignment regs. And again, I recognise that gender reassignment regs probably don't go far enough in terms of what we were just talking about, and recognising all the identities and expressions under that piece of legislation. So I think that those two areas are probably the two areas that was able to shape, which then obviously led to the Same-Sex Marriage Act of 2013, if memory serves me right. So I think these are the biggies that I would say that I really feel proud to have been a part of in some small way, to be able to shape and change the direction.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, you know, I know that obviously when we got civil partnership, we were campaigning for same-sex marriage, and fortunately that did come along a few years later. So that, that's wonderful. And I know lots of people who who decided that they would change over to marriage, which is lovely, and so nice that we had that choice to do so. So in terms of your life, and you referenced, obviously coming out very early on, at 15, a very brave choice. My coming out was very hampered by legislation. When I think back of when they were looking to scrap Clause 28, the vitriol that that was in the city that I lived at the time really put me off coming out. I was literally on the precipice of coming out, and it really put me off and set me back a good couple of years. How was it for you, during those early years, when you were out, you'd moved down to London? What were kind of some of the challenges that you faced?
I mean, there is absolutely no denying. I mean, you're talking about 1983. The LGBT community was a community. It really felt like everybody was there for each other and really wanted to support each other. But even though the community was a together community, there was still that fear aspect. You just felt that if you were out, and you never went out on your own, never, because that sort of fear factor of somebody noticed you, got to recognise that you were a little bit different, hearing footsteps behind you, you learned how to run very, very quickly, because people just didn't get it, and there was a lot of resentment about it. As I say, it was at the similar sort of time where, as you know, that little lovely bit of legislation that came out about the non-teaching, and suddenly we were subject to all sorts of things. And then, of course, on top of that, you had the AIDS pandemic just coming around at that time as well. There was just, nobody knew how to react to LGBT people. There was just so much fear, so much nothingness on that kind of aspect. The only time you could truly be yourself would be in Soho or around that kind of part of the community, to be yourself. But in the workplace, you just didn't dare come out about who you were. But of course, because of the trans history and because of the way things happened at that time, you just felt like you were coming out again and again and again. And of course, for me personally, the way the media played on my story often, where I found myself in a headline in the newspaper again and again. You're a bit of, including when I was doing my modelling, where it was a bit of a case of, you're a bit of all right, Jack. Yes, we did say Jack, it's a man. And you just had no hiding place from it whatsoever.
And that sounds really hard, because it's exhausting enough making decisions about whether we come out or not. But to have that choice taken away from you must just be awful.
It was. There is absolutely no denying. I just felt, no matter what I could do, I mean, for me, I just wanted to get on and live. But I was never allowed that opportunity to live, because it was just a constant battle. And I often describe my CV prior to joining the civil service as a patchwork quilt, because I went from job to job to job to job. And this is up to 2006, where I was going from place to place to place, because there was absolutely no protection. Yeah, we had the gender reassignment regs that came into the gender reassignment regs that came into the Sex Discrimination Act in 1999. But it was only just something on a piece of paper. People didn't really abide by it. So, as we know, I think the real change probably came, even although the Gender Recognition Act came in 2004, it was probably only about 2010 when realistically things really started to change in a major way for us as a wider LGBT community.
And why do you think that was, Jacqui? Why do you think it took so long, and what changed?
One could argue politically. Let's not kid ourselves. Certain parties, let's call them the blue side, may have had a certain viewpoint on those kind of things. And I think there was the change in 1997 when the Labour Party came in that really started to really push things, because we know that Labour were really, really keen to do what they needed to do under Tony Blair. But as well as the political message, I think it was also about the way the community was starting to gather momentum. I think the Equality Act, in particularly, because it was about the perception, it was also about the way people were dealt with. It was about discrimination. It was very, very clear in the Act, based on those 9 protected characteristics, that really gave, I suppose, a voice to people, gave that opportunity for people to say, you know what, I've been in the closet long enough. I've now got a piece of legislation. If I feel that I'm being vindicated, I'm being discriminated in any way, shape or form, in my job, in my social life, in everything I do, I've now got a bit of more confidence to turn around and say, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You have to treat me in the same way as everybody else.
Yeah, it was a very empowering act in a way. As you say, it was very clear. And I think because it was acted on as well, you know, people could see in the media there were, you know, cases where it just wouldn't be tolerated. And I think that made it very clear that it wasn't just a worthless piece of paper. It was actually an act that, you know, people would get in trouble if they didn't, you know, if they didn't comply. Yeah. So no, I think you're absolutely right. It was a real turning point, I think, for a lot of people. It's interesting you talk about the community and about the togetherness of the community, and I think it was that way for a long time. Obviously now there are sort of, you know, cracks appearing. There's a lot of you know, talk about gender versus sex, and a lot of lesbians or gay women or whoever, however you, queer women, deciding that they don't support trans women and trans people in general.
Yeah.
Why do you think we've come from that lovely community spirit, and that community is still there, but to have this sort of breakaway group, what do you think's caused that?
I think a lot of it, and this is me speaking personally, the trans umbrella has got so huge lately. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, we were speaking about the huge amount of identities, expressions, and all those kind of things. I mean, I think there's, at last count, I counted roughly about 128 ways of expressing one's gender. And I think people are a little bit frightened of that. So it's almost like people are seeing that if you simply put on a frog and a bit of makeup, it gives you the permission to inherit the female pronoun. And whereas some people think, well, hang on a minute, sex isn't necessarily, or gender isn't necessarily what you wear, it's what your actually skin tells you. And I think there's that little bit of fear now that just because people have that choice to be able to put on any kind of clothing they want, we've had that for decades. We've had it for centuries, for goodness sake. Nothing has actually changed. But I think because, I suppose, and again, this sounds condescending, but when we think about the old-fashioned word of transvestite or cross-dresser, did those individuals ever claim the female pronoun? Did they ever claim them as what they're looking for? And now people are now a little bit frightened of that, because you're coming into safe spaces, as they would see it, female changing rooms, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So it's like, hang on a minute, whoa, this is another step too far. I don't get why you feel that you have the right to come into a space where I feel safe, and vice versa, if it's a female dressed in male Norse clothes coming into a male-only space. I'm not saying that the males will certainly feel that that's a threat, but in some ways they might see it as a threat. So I think there's that fear factor in there is a massive thing that's going on. But as I say, people have been dressing in a variety of different things for so long. We just need to look at Boy George. We just need to look at David Bowie and people like that. They've always pushed the boundaries. Freddie Mercury pushed the boundaries. But now it's coming into encroaching into what we traditionally, and I've always grown up with, there's male and there's female. Mm-hmm. Yes, we've got people that cross that divide, but now it's like, but hang on a minute, the divide, the middle area is so much larger, and now you're pushing me into a corner. And that's where people, when people are pushed into a corner, the only way they want to come out is come out and attack. So I think what's got to happen is the non-binary groups will probably have to better express or talk through that thing and not see when people are coming out with questioning it. Let's use J.K. Rowling as an example. When they're saying what they're saying, let's listen to what J.K. is actually saying. What is J.K. actually coming up with? What's causing the fear? So that we can better understand, so that J.K. better understands, and we can all come together in this middle ground and better understand. Because that's what we've done when it comes to whether it be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or binary transsexual as well, to better understand those things. Because I don't think people fully understand this middle ground, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, that does make sense. And it's interesting because, obviously I am a cis woman, and I've, spoken about very much, the fact that I have to go on personal experience. And I think a lot of this is sensationalized by the media. I always, say to people, it's in the news because it's unusual. That's why it's news. So all of these, these men dressing up as women, and then attacking women, it very, very rarely happens in my experience. I have never met any trans or non-binary person who's been anything other than gentle and also just wanted to get on with their lives and stay quite quiet, and I mean certainly quieter than me.
Absolutely. I think that you've hit it squarely on the head there. I think most of us, if not all of us, just simply want to just get on with our lives and just to be acknowledged, respected for who we are, whether that mean that we go the full A to Z route or the Z to A route, or whether we go from A to F or from A to T. Who is really going to be concerned about it? Because all we're trying to do is just try and do what we need to do. The whole thing about the toilet debate. A toilet is a toilet. Nothing unusual goes on in any toilet whatsoever, believe me. Yeah, I'm sure there's probably things that have happened. George Michael as an example. but hey, in the main, a toilet is a toilet, regardless.
I know, and I do find it very interesting because I don't know anyone at home that has gendered toilets. I don't know any house with a gendered toilet. So I think if we can manage to do it in our own homes, we should be able to manage to do it out with our own homes as well.
Absolutely.
So moving on, you mentioned that it was very difficult at work, that you really didn't want to come out at work. So how was it when you were closeted at work? What were the sort of challenges that you faced there?
I suppose when I wasn't able to be true to myself, I was always having that fear about being found out, because there was always that little Chinese whispers that would go around the office. I know that my voice is deeper. I know I've got a more gravelly type voice, and people would, especially in the more up to date years, when that little thing called the World Wide Web came along, and suddenly even on that space, so there is absolutely no hiding place for me. So it was that kind of aspect about people would go on like, and I'd be like, oh, for goodness sake, can I not just talk about it? And it just was making me ill. It was making me feel that I just was not being true to myself. I wasn't being authentic. I was just constantly having to try and justify everything and trying to find the way. And people would, as I say, always find a way of stopping me from getting that next promotion because, well, that person, they're trans, they're probably a very emotional wreck or things like that. And as I say, I was never considered for a lot of promotions until, as I say, that change in particularly with the change in legislation, because it suddenly allowed me to have that freedom to be myself and that freedom to talk about it. If people wanted to talk about it, I would just be able to talk about it. And the civil service saw that and said, you know what, we recognise the way the legislation protects you, but if you're prepared to be a part of this kind of aspect, if you're prepared to be a role model for trans, we want you to be in this space. And let's be honest, we all like a bit of spotlight on us from time to time. And suddenly here I was able to shift that dial, holding court with all the seniors of the civil service, holding court with some of the members of parliament and in the cabinet, and have those conversations. It just felt I was there, I was conducting them, I was taking them on that journey to understand what it felt like to be me. So wow, what an experience.
Yeah, completely invaluable. And you know, what you did was really powerful, because to be able to take people on that journey and to, you know, have your story resonate with them will have given them a much deeper understanding and a better appreciation of what these laws and what the legislation means to the wider audience. It's a huge thing. So obviously now you're an advocate of being out at work, which is great. What would you say for you know, we have trans women in our network who are at various points of transition, and I know transition is very personal. Someone described it to me and they said, you know, and this person's non-binary, and they said, you know, for some people it's like a pregnancy. It's 9 months and then you're done. And I was like, okay, fair enough. I've been pregnant. I can figure that one out. And they said, but for other people, it's a lifelong journey. And I love that. I think it's so nice that it's so, you know, individual and unique for each person. But for you, the journey, what's that been like for you, and what kind of pearls of wisdom can you give to other trans women?
I think the most important thing is to realise that, as you said, this is unique to the individual. I think too many trans people try to justify it by almost saying, oh, that's just like me. Let's be honest, have your own journey. Your own journey is unique to you. And not be ashamed of he or she who got you to where you are, because they are a powerful ally in this aspect, if not your most powerful ally. And they're the most powerful person that supported you, took you through that journey to get to where you are now. And people need to recognise that. And I celebrate Scott, who took me to where I needed to be. Because, yes, it was difficult. But I hold on to the memories of him, because he was strong when he needed to be. He was powerful when he needed to be. And he was honest with himself to be able to say, you know what, I now need to be able to take this to the next step in my journey. Since my transition, I'm constantly learning every single day. And again, I would say to people to realise that the grass isn't greener on the other side of the fence. Yes, you're able to face challenges much more easier because you're being true to yourself and being more authentic. But you still got to get up in the morning. You've still got the bills to pay. And you know what? Some days are a bit rubbish. Some days are great. But I think, as I say, that's probably the most powerful thing I could say to anybody, is realise that you're on this journey and you will constantly learn. And don't let go of him or her, because they are as much a part of your life. Celebrate them, and don't be afraid of the photographs of him or her, because, again, they got you to where you are today.
That's so lovely. I really like that idea of they're part of your journey. That, I suppose they're your start of your journey.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's lovely. So I know you referenced the 80s earlier, and It's a Sin obviously has been sort of this breakout hit for Russell T Davies. I've seen criticism that, you know, lesbians are sort of not really mentioned, but neither are trans people either. How true to life do you feel that sort of depiction was, or was it very, in your mind, was it very sort of one-dimensional?
I don't think it was one-dimensional at all. I mean, yes, there wasn't really much depiction, and she said, of the lesbian or the trans side, but what a powerful series. I mean, the first weekend it came out, I watched it from start to finish. I laughed, I cried. It just was so right, and I've sent a couple of messages to Lisa Power, who was obviously an advisor on the series itself, and it was just absolutely spot on with everything about that period of time, because I suppose it was probably the time to be more proud and out there as a gay man. But the whole story about it, from seeing Colin in the hospital and just the way that they were treated, even I can't remember the name of the character of the other person in the tailor shop where Colin worked, and seeing him put in that coffin and the way he was treated in a ward all on his own. Those days were horrible, the way they treated it. And granted, the health service didn't know how to treat people. They didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know how infectious it was. But wow, what a powerful series. And credit to Russell T Davies, and of course to Lisa Power as well, because you got it absolutely spot on, from the rent boy to the whole process. And I just wish in some ways it had been a little bit longer.
So do I. Apparently it was supposed to be a longer series, but you couldn't get it commissioned to be a longer series, which is a shame. Now, I had to space them out because I found them so traumatic, and when Colin died, I didn't think I'd ever recover. So there you go. I find it very interesting that we have these discussions now. I mean, I was around in the 80s, I was quite young, but that, you know, even going into the noughties, the sort of suspicion of gay men and AIDS and HIV still hung very heavy in the air, and, you know, there was plenty of men still going to anonymous, you know, sort of sexual health clinics rather than going to their own GPs for tests because of the problems it could cause. Yeah. But I do find it really interesting that now I'm talking about, you know, that sort of thing with straight people who don't realise just what happened. And, you know, they're either my age or they're a bit older. We're not talking about kids here, you know. Yeah, and I find it really interesting. It was a lovely series, and I think I just wish it had been a bit longer as well. And I think maybe they would have been able to explore a couple more characters. But I think you're right in that community that you talked about earlier. You really felt that in the series, didn't you? It was such a lovely depiction.
Absolutely. I mean, okay, they didn't pick up on the polarity, but they did at the same time pick up on the polarity, where obviously each of the male gay characters had a female name. And of course, that's what polarity was about. Everybody had a female sort of name in that kind of aspect. But there was a little bit of trans there. There was a little bit of lesbianism there, but not a huge amount. I'm sure, as if enough pressure is mounted, and let's have a conversation with Colin Campbell-Austin, who's head of diversity at Channel 4, and say, let's have a second series, shall we? Can we do another series where we can do something else? Yeah, let's get campaigning for that. I think that's a great idea. So what's the future looking at like for you, Jacqui? What's next on the horizon? Retirement, please. No, I mean, to me, I just feel at the moment, right now, I'm trying to take stock of where we are as a society, because let's be honest, where we are with the pandemic, everybody's a little bit frightened, a little bit scared. And I think most of the debates are going on in these little boxes at the moment. And I think what we've got to get to is get through this pandemic. And I think we've got to make sure that we provide a space that ensures that every single voice in this space is heard. That's, to me, is the one thing that's been missed for quite a number of years now. We seem to have got to a point where whenever we talk about trans, it's this person or that person or this person. Whenever we talk about gay, it's this person or that person. You know what? I think my good friend Lord Michael Cashman, talks about this often, about the togetherness, only together. And I think that's where we've got to get to, is stop the debate on here, bring ourselves together and move forward this agenda forward in a massive way. Because if we can do that, just think about how much better we can be as a society, rather than just, as I say, thinking that it's just about a select few, because it's not. There's thousands of us who identify in this space, and let's create a space which empowers those people who right now are a little bit frightened of the world because they can't be themselves, because of the way the pandemic's had an impact on them, because they're the ones that are really, really suffering right now. So let's give them that voice, give them that space.
I love it. I love it. And it's important to note that you've been awarded an honours in the Queen's Honours List. How did that feel?
It was strange, if I'm honest, because I was sat here at this table and I got a phone call, and it's like, did you pick up the email we sent you? I'm like, what email is this? And of course, if you look at my phone, it's got 80,000 emails that I haven't probably opened or anything like that, because I'm just fed up of the junk that comes into it sometimes. And then I opened it and I went, oh, that one. So it was quite a surprise, lovely surprise at the same time. Everybody talked about it and stuff like that. Whoever it was, let me say this, thank you, whoever nominated me. I don't still to this day know who it is, because we never get to find out who it was. And of course there needs to be people who provide supporting messages to get an honour. And it was like, wow, I actually go to Cambridge all being equal if the world opens up to pick up my honour on the 8th of March, which is, of course, International Women's Day. So what an honour to be able to do that as well.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations. I think it's very well deserved.
Thank you.
I think, the work that you've done throughout the years as an activist and as a role model have been absolutely fantastic. And, we're absolutely delighted to have you on board as one of our patrons. And thank you so much for your time today.
Anytime. Anytime.